The road, what was left of it, dwindled to a pair of moss-choked ruts before disappearing entirely beneath a canopy of ancient oaks. I shifted the old pickup into a lower gear, the engine groaning in protest, and leaned closer to the windshield, peering through the drizzle. My meticulous nature, usually a comfort, felt like a burden in this wilderness. Every scratch on the paintwork of the truck, every speck of mud on the meticulously packed antique restoration tools in the back, grated on me. But this was it. The address on the probate papers, scrawled in an elegant, spidery hand, had led me here. Through the gaps in the gnarled branches, the manor house finally revealed itself. It wasn't merely old, it was ancient, a hulking silhouette against the bruised sky, like a forgotten titan slumped in slumber. Gray stone, once grand, was now stained with centuries of weather, draped in thick, grasping ivy that seemed to hold it captive. Windows, dark and vacant, stared out like empty eye sockets, some shattered, others boarded over with planks that looked as weathered as the stone itself. A sagging roofline suggested a broken spine, and the chimneys, once proud, were crumbling teeth. A rusted, wrought iron gate, half off its hinges, marked the boundary of the property. I pushed it open, the screech of protesting metal echoing through the damp air, a sound so sharp it made the hair on my arms prickle. The drive, once gravel, was now a treacherous path of tangled roots and slick mud. As I bumped slowly towards the house, the sheer scale of the place began to sink in. It wasn't just large, it was sprawling, a labyrinth of wings and turrets that seemed to have grown organically over time, each addition telling a silent story of its own. The silence, once I cut the engine, was profound, broken only by the drip of water from the eaves and the distant call of an unseen bird. It felt heavy, pressing in on me, almost alive. My restorer's eye, accustomed to seeing beauty beneath the grime, saw only an insurmountable task. The ornate carving around the main door was almost entirely obscured by lichen. My hand hesitated before I gripped the cold metal ring. No doorbell, of course. No answer. The door groaned inwards, dragging against the floorboards, revealing a cavern of gloom. The air that rushed out to meet me was thick with the scent of damp earth, decaying wood, and something else, something musty and vaguely metallic, like old blood or forgotten iron. I stepped across the threshold, my boots sinking slightly into a century of dust and fallen plaster. My gaze traced the peeling wallpaper, the cracked plasterwork, the ghostly outlines where forgotten portraits had once hung. This house didn't just contain history, it was history, slowly decaying, exhaling its past. I pulled out my heavy-duty flashlight, clicking it on. The beam cut a swathe through the gloom, illuminating swirling motes of dust that danced like phantom insects. I moved slowly, my footsteps muffled by the thick carpet of debris, a strange mix of professional curiosity and growing unease prickling at my skin. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of dry leaves blown in from outside, seemed amplified, as if the house itself was sighing around me. I decided to start with a preliminary circuit, just to get my bearings, to map out the scale of the restoration ahead. Room after room revealed itself, a cavernous drawing room with a fireplace large enough to stand in, a dining hall with a massive table still laden with dust-shrouded, broken crockery, a library where shelves sagged under the weight of forgotten tomes, their pages brittle and yellowed. Each space was a tableau of abandonment, a snapshot frozen in time, gathering dust. As I ventured deeper, past what might have been a pantry, the air grew noticeably cooler, the musty scent intensifying. My flashlight beam cut through a narrow, low-ceilinged corridor that seemed less part of the main house and more like an afterthought, tacked on or perhaps predating the rest. A faint, persistent vibration. resonated through the soles of my boots. It wasn't a rumble, more of a steady, low thrum, like something working tirelessly beneath the earth. I followed the sound, my heart beginning a slow, heavy thud against my ribs. It led me to a heavy wooden door, unlatched, slightly ajar. And there it was, the source of the vibration. In the corner of this damp, subterranean chamber was a laundry room with humming machines. Not just one, but a collection of them, a colossal, ancient washing machine with a copper drum, a heavy iron mangle, and a dryer that looked like it belonged on a battleship. All of them, even the mangle, were vibrating with a low, insistent hum, a deep, mechanical drone that filled the space. There was no water running, no clothes tumbling, no steam, yet the machines hummed, a persistent, unsettling pulse. I stared, my breath catching in my throat. How could these antique machines be running, or even powered, in a house that had been abandoned for decades, a house with no apparent electricity? My meticulous mind, which thrived on order and explanation, found nothing but an impossible contradiction. This house wasn't just old, it was wrong. And something within its decaying walls was still very much alive. Yulia comfort found itself wrestling with a rising tide of unease. This place, this manor, was more than just old, it was a hulking silhouette against the bruised sky, a monument to forgotten lives, and it felt like it was watching me even before I'd stepped foot on the property. The last of the gravel crunched under the tires as the pickup finally rolled to a stop in front of a sprawling, decaying structure. Rain slicked the weathered stone, making the gargoyles perched on the eaves appear to weep. The front door, a monstrous slab of oak, hung slightly ajar, revealing a maw of impenetrable gloom. A shiver, not entirely from the damp, traced its way up my spine. This wasn't just a house, it was a challenge, a canvas of neglect demanding my meticulous touch. And, despite the prickle of apprehension, a familiar determination solidified in my chest. I was here to restore, to resurrect. I spent the first few hours methodically unloading my tools and supplies. Each box, each canvas-wrapped instrument, was placed with precision, a small act of order against the house's overwhelming chaos. The interior air was thick with the scent of damp earth, decaying wood, and something else, a faint, metallic tang I couldn't quite place. My breath plumed in the cold, unheated space. The main hall was a cavernous expanse of peeling wallpaper and cobweb-draped chandeliers. Dust motes danced in the slivers of weak light that pierced the grimy windows. I decided to start small, to tackle something manageable before diving into the grander, more intimidating rooms. A small antechamber off the main drawing room seemed like a good candidate. It contained a single, ornate writing desk, its veneer cracked and faded, but with the promise of intricate inlay beneath the grime. Setting up my workstation in the antechamber, I laid out my chisels, brushes, solvents, and polishes on a drop cloth. I chose a delicate burin, its handle worn smooth from years of use, and a small, stiff-bristled brush. I placed the burin on the left side of my cloth, next to the small pot of beeswax, a habit ingrained from countless hours in my workshop. I then turned to unpack a box of cleaning cloths, my back briefly to the desk. When I turned back, the burin was gone. My brow furrowed. I scanned the cloth, then the floor around it. Nothing. My gaze swept the desk, the nearby shelves. Had I picked it up without thinking? My memory felt solid. I distinctly recalled placing it. I checked my pockets. Empty. A flash of irritation sparked through me. This house, already playing tricks on my concentration. I sighed, then spotted it. The burin lay near the foot of the desk, several feet from where I'd left it, tucked beneath the edge of a moth-eaten rug. Clumsy, I muttered, bending to retrieve it. I must have knocked it with my elbow, or it had simply rolled. The explanation felt thin, even to me, but I pushed the thought aside. Old houses settled. Old houses had drafts. My mind was probably just overactive in this new, silent environment. I began my work on the desk, carefully applying a cleaning solution to a small section of the wood, the subtle scent of citrus cutting through the mustiness. The silence of the manor was profound, broken only by the gentle scrape of my brush and the occasional drip of rain outside. Then, a new sound. A faint, rhythmic thump-thump-thump seemed to emanate from somewhere deeper within the house. It wasn't loud, but it was persistent, a dull, resonant beat that vibrated through the floorboards. I paused, my hand hovering over the desk. "Hello?" I called out, my voice swallowed by the vastness. No answer. The thumping continued, steady and unwavering. It sounded like something heavy, rhythmic, maybe a loose shutter banging in a forgotten attic, or perhaps a faulty pipe. This house was a symphony of decay, I reminded myself. But the sound felt too deliberate, too present. A sudden need for a change of clothes, and a check on the utilities, spurred me to explore. I needed to find the laundry room with humming machines if I was to properly set up house. Following a maze of dimly lit corridors and descending a flight of creaking stairs, I eventually found it in the basement. The air down here was cooler, heavy with the scent of ozone and mildew. A bank of ancient-looking washers and dryers stood against one wall, their rusted casings testament to decades of disuse. To my surprise, one of the washing machines was indeed running, a low, consistent whirring and sloshing sound filling the space, accompanied by the distinct, low thrum of its motor. But the drum was empty. My breath hitched. I stared at the clear glass door, mesmerized by the vigorous churning of nothing but sudsy water. It was an impossibility. I hadn't turned it on. No one else was here. I reached out a tentative hand, touching the machine. It vibrated with genuine operation. The humming was real. The heat from the motor was real. It was too quick, too indistinct to be anything but a trick of the light, perhaps my own eyes adjusting to the dimness. The thumping from upstairs had stopped. The only sound now was the relentless, empty churning of the washing machine, and the frantic drumming of my own pulse. I backed away slowly, my gaze fixed on the empty drum, then darting to the doorway. The feeling of being watched intensified, a prickling sensation on the nape of my neck. My meticulous mind, usually a fortress of logic, found itself under siege. Returning to the antechamber, the writing desk seemed to regard me differently. The section I had just cleaned, revealing a delicate floral inlay, now seemed subtly distorted. There was a tiny, almost invisible scratch running through one of the petals, a mark I hadn't seen before, a blemish I was certain wasn't there when I'd first polished it. I leaned closer, tracing the line with a fingertip. It was so faint, so delicate, it could have been a natural imperfection in the wood. But I remembered the flawless gleam, the perfect curve of the petal, with a clarity that felt suddenly, unnervingly, fragile. The house wasn't just old. It was aware. And I was its newest occupant. The last of the packing boxes sat in the corner of what I designated my temporary study, a space that would eventually become a proper workshop. For now, it was just a room with a desk, a lamp, and an overwhelming scent of dust and something else. Something dry and earthen, like old bone. I'd spent the better part of the day just walking the perimeter of the manor, making mental notes, sketching out a preliminary restoration plan. The scale of it was daunting, even for me. Every floorboard creaked with a different story, every wall seemed to sag with the weight of centuries. I found myself drawn to a particular section of the library, a vast, echoing chamber lined with empty shelves. The wainscoting here was unusually ornate, a series of carved panels depicting flora and fauna that seemed out of place with the otherwise austere architecture. My fingers, accustomed to the subtle language of aged wood, traced the intricate patterns. One panel, depicting a coiled serpent amongst tangled vines, felt slightly warmer to the touch than its neighbors. I pressed gently, then harder, feeling a minuscule give. There was no seam, no visible latch, but the wood hummed under my fingertips with a different resonance. I fetched my small toolkit, a soft mallet, a set of dental picks, a powerful LED penlight. My work was often forensic in its precision, teasing out the secrets of objects without leaving a trace. I tapped around the serpent panel, listening. The sound was duller, hollower than the solid thud of the surrounding wood. Slowly, carefully, I worked a thin pick into a hairline crack near the serpent's head, feeling for a mechanism. There was a faint click, almost imperceptible. The panel didn't swing open. Instead, it slid inward, then sideways, revealing not a void, but a narrow, unlit space. My penlight beam cut through the gloom, illuminating a small, forgotten alcove. Inside, nestled on a dusty shelf, was a single, leather-bound book. It wasn't a book in the traditional sense, more a thick, squat journal. The leather was so dry it cracked as I lifted it, releasing a fine powder that settled on my gloves. No title, no author. Just a series of faded, gold-embossed symbols on the cover that I couldn't immediately identify, interlocking triangles, a jagged line, a weeping eye. The clasp was rusted, but gave way with a gentle persuasion from a pick. The first few entries were mundane, chronicling weather, harvests, local gossip. But then, the tone shifted. August 17, 1883. The gray returns. Old Man Hemlock saw it again, moving through the woods near the south pasture. Says it steals the light from the air. The children are quiet. September 3rd, Mrs. Albright's youngest, little Elara, gone. They searched the river, the hills. Nothing. I hear them, even with the windows latched tight. October 1st. The miller's boy, Thomas. He was found wandering the road to town, babbling. Said they asked for things. He doesn't remember his own name now. Just stares. A vacant husk. The constable says he's touched by the moon. I know better. The entries grew increasingly erratic, the handwriting more frantic. There were sketches too, crude, disturbing depictions of elongated figures, blurred faces, and swirling mists. The local history it hinted at was not the quaint, forgotten past I'd anticipated. It was a history of quiet horror, of things taken, of minds unspooled. The journal spoke of a creeping erosion, not of physical structures, but of identity itself. The air felt heavy, stagnant. I closed my eyes, trying to process the strange, unsettling accounts. The gray. The things that ask for things. What had the old resident of this manor been experiencing? Or had they simply been unwell? I reached for my penlight, but it wasn't on the desk. I distinctly remembered placing it next to the journal. I scanned the desktop, then the floor. A prickle of annoyance. I just had it. Where could it have gone? Odd, I mumbled, pushing back from the desk. I walked to the switch, flipped on the overhead light. The room brightened, but the penlight was still missing. I searched my pockets, checked behind the journal, under the few scattered papers. It wasn't anywhere. I must have put it down somewhere else, I decided, shaking my head. Too much stress, too much isolation. Inheriting a place like this, with its endless list of repairs and its forgotten secrets, was bound to fray the edges of my concentration. I was folding a load of towels, the warm, clean scent a brief, welcome reprieve from the dust and age. As I smoothed it out, I paused. This wasn't my towel. It was thicker, softer, with a faint, embroidered crest I didn't recognize. A small, almost imperceptible design, faded with age. A lion's head. I didn't own anything with a lion's head. I certainly hadn't packed it. Had it been mixed in with the previous occupants' things? But I'd been so careful, so methodical in my unpacking. Every item had been catalogued, sorted. How many of these items were truly mine? I couldn't be sure. I couldn't be absolutely, unequivocally sure. I shook my head, dismissing the thought. It was just a towel. Just a forgotten item. This place was getting to me. I folded it anyway, adding it to the stack, but the soft fabric felt alien in my hands, a silent, unsettling question mark. I stood in the laundry room with humming machines, the soft, unfamiliar towel clutched in my hand. A lion's head. Faded, yes, but unmistakable. It wasn't mine. I didn't own anything like this, never had. My own towels were stacked neatly in a basket beside me, crisp white squares from a department store. This one felt different, heavier, the loops of its cotton dense and luxurious. A shiver traced its way down my spine, not from cold, but from a creeping sense of displacement. Had I picked it up by mistake? No, I'd specifically reached for my stack. I shook my head, a futile attempt to dislodge the feeling. It was just a towel. An old towel. But the implication, the simple, undeniable fact that something foreign had infiltrated my personal space, unsettled me profoundly. This small, domestic anomaly became the catalyst. I retreated to my study, a temporary sanctuary I'd set up amidst the dust sheets and antique furniture. My laptop glowed, a beacon in the encroaching gloom of the manor. I started with the obvious: land deeds, local historical societies, online archives. Information about the manor itself was surprisingly scarce, or perhaps, deliberately obscured. It was always referred to simply as Blackwood Manor, its history vague, its previous owners listed in dry, bureaucratic language. But then, sifting through digitized newspaper clippings from a century ago, I found fragments. Not about the manor directly, but about the surrounding area, hushed reports of unexplained disappearances of servants, a sudden descent into melancholia of a former mistress, a peculiar affliction that seemed to plague the residents. The language was archaic, euphemistic, yet the underlying current of unease was palpable. One article, yellowed and brittle even in its digital form, mentioned the old house on the hill and the strange dreams that stole one's waking hours. There was no explicit mention of a lion's crest, no direct link to my towel. The vague, unsettling nature of these accounts resonated with the feeling of something wrong that had been steadily growing within the manor's walls. The more I read, the more the air in the study seemed to thicken, pressing in on me, making my scalp prickle. That night, the dreams began. Or rather, they intensified. Now, they were vivid, tactile assaults. Figures moved at the periphery of my vision, indistinct, faceless, yet their presence was a crushing weight. They didn't speak, but a sound, like dry leaves skittering across stone, filled the air, and with each rustle, a memory would detach itself from my mind, floating away like a dandelion seed on the wind. I woke with a gasp, the taste of dust in my mouth, a profound sense of loss aching in my chest. What had I forgotten? What had been taken? The question was a clawing sensation in my gut. The next day, the entity's influence became more insidious, bleeding into my waking hours. I spun around, but there was nothing. Only the motes of dust dancing in the sunlight, the quiet creak of the old house settling. I told myself it was fatigue, the strain of the research, the lingering effects of the nightmare. But the image, the distinct impression of something shifting, remained. I remembered meticulously disassembling its intricate gears the previous afternoon, laying them out on a felt cloth. Now, the mainspring was missing. I searched frantically, retracing my steps, emptying drawers, but it was gone. Not misplaced, not knocked to the floor. Simply gone. I distinctly remembered putting it in the small wooden box I used for tiny components. Had I done that? Had I even worked on the clock yesterday? The memory of the previous afternoon was suddenly hazy, indistinct. I could recall the feeling of the brass in my fingers, the scent of the old oil, but the sequence of events, the specific actions, were dissolving. I gripped the edge of the workbench, my knuckles white. The fragmented accounts of madness and strange occurrences I'd read earlier echoed in my ears. Was this what they meant? Was this the peculiar affliction? A picture where the lines between reality and a horrifying delusion were blurring, and I, Reed, the meticulous restorer, was losing my grip on both. The soft, unfamiliar towel, emblazoned with that faded lion's head, felt alien in my grip. My mind, usually a meticulous archive of details, felt strangely hollowed out, as if a vital section had been cleanly excised. A lion. Not mine. I knew my towels. Plain white, thick cotton, no embellishments. Always. This one was a pale blue, threadbare in places, the embroidered beast staring blankly. I spun on my heel, scanning the baskets of clean clothes. All of it was mine. My shirts, my trousers, the socks I'd bought just last month. Everything except this one peculiar towel. Had I somehow forgotten buying it? I prided myself on my memory, on the precise recall that made me an exceptional restorer. Every crack, every pigment, every historical detail, I kept it all catalogued, but this? A peculiar smell, faint but distinct, began to prickle at my nose. Not laundry detergent, not the clean scent of dried fabric. It was something metallic, earthy, like old pennies mixed with damp soil. I sniffed, tracing the scent. They were gray, industrial, the kind you'd see in a factory or a warehouse, not in a Manor's laundry room. I knelt, peering into one. It was empty, but the metallic tang was stronger here. My fingers brushed the inside. A gritty film coated the plastic. Not dust. Something else. The hum of the dryer seemed to deepen, vibrating through the concrete floor, a low, resonant growl that settled in my teeth. Then, a new sound began to weave into it, a faint scratching, rhythmic and insistent, coming from somewhere above me. I looked up. The ceiling was solid plaster, no visible vents or pipes where a creature might scratch. Yet, the sound persisted, like tiny claws dragging across rough wood. Scritch, scritch. I wasn't alone. Not really. I hadn't been alone since I'd stepped foot in this house. This was it, wasn't it? The beginning of something more direct. I gripped the lion towel tighter, its rough texture a small anchor. The scratching intensified, moving, it seemed, across the ceiling directly above me. I started to stand, my gaze fixed upwards, when the fluorescent lights above flickered. Once, twice, then settled into a sickly, pulsing glow. The laundry room with humming machines seemed to breathe around me, the air growing heavy, thick with the metallic, earthy smell. Then, the dryer's hum, already unnerving, began to distort. It stretched, warbled, like a tape recording played too slowly, then too fast. It became a low moan, a guttural sigh that seemed to echo not from the machine, but from the very walls themselves. The scratching above me morphed too, blending into the distorted hum, sounding now less like claws and more like a multitude of faint, indistinct voices, like dry leaves rustling, saying nothing I could comprehend, yet filling the air with a palpable sense of presence. No. This isn't real. It's the house. It's the strain. You're tired, read. I opened them again. The room was the same. The humming machines. The gray bins. The lion towel still clutched in my hand. Then, it wasn't just sounds. A memory, sharp and vivid, flashed through my mind. My workshop, years ago. The smell of linseed oil and aged wood. I was carefully sanding the leg of an antique table, my concentration absolute. But in this memory, my hands were different. Thicker, calloused, with broken nails. Not my hands. And the table wasn't a queen inn, it was a rough, unvarnished pine plank, resting on sawhorses. I was wearing an apron I'd never owned, stained with what looked like soil. The memory vanished, replaced by another. My father. His laugh, booming in the old kitchen. But his face was wrong. His eyes were too close together, his teeth uneven. This wasn't just forgetting a towel. This was an invasion. It was twisting my past, corrupting the very bedrock of who I was. My father didn't look like that. The metallic, earthy smell intensified, burning my nostrils. I felt a pressure building behind my eyes, a dizzying nausea. The room seemed to tilt, the floor shifting beneath my feet. My face was gaunt, my eyes sunken, and my hair was white, not the gray I knew. And I was smiling, a wide, unsettling grin that stretched my reflection's face unnaturally. I tore my gaze away, heart hammering against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the entity's assault. I had to ground myself. I squeezed the towel, focusing on its texture. Rough. Blue. Lion. This was real. I was Reed. I was in the laundry room with humming machines. But then, a new memory, vivid as sunlight, bloomed in my mind. I was a child, no older than 7, clutching this very towel. My mother was kneeling beside me, her voice soft, "Your favorite, darling. Your brave lion." The memory was so clear, so warm, so right. Yet, I had no memory of a lion towel from my childhood. None. My childhood towels were yellow ducks. I remembered the yellow ducks. A searing pain lanced through my skull. My knees buckled. Was I lying to myself? Had I always been wrong? Was this towel, this lion, a forgotten truth, or a manufactured lie planted deep inside me? The line blurred, dissolved. My own past, my own identity, became a kaleidoscope of shifting, unreliable images. Wasn't I? The metallic tang of ozone and stale detergent clung to my tongue, a bitter counterpoint to the relentless, low thrum of the machines around me. My ears still rang, not from the physical sound, but from the echoes of the whispers that had just tried to unravel me. I pushed myself up from the cold, damp floor of the laundry room with humming machines, my muscles protesting with a dull ache I couldn't quite place. What was I doing here? The question, a moment ago a gaping chasm, now felt merely like a loose thread. Read. I knew my purpose. Restoring this place. No. This wasn't right. I needed to leave. Now. My hand fumbled for my phone, a familiar weight in my pocket. My fingers, surprisingly steady despite the tremor in my gut, pulled it free. The screen glowed, a comforting rectangle of light in the dim room. Except the date displayed was off. Not by a day or two, but by weeks. My brow furrowed. Had I been here that long? No, that was impossible. I scrolled through my contacts. Most of them were gone. Just a handful remained, unrecognizable numbers, or names that meant nothing to me. Nothing. No signal. Not even an emergency call. I tried again, pressing the screen with a growing franticness, as if brute force could somehow conjure a network connection. It was useless. The phone was a dead weight, a mockery of connection. I shoved the useless device back into my pocket. Escape. That was the only option. The hallway stretched before me, familiar yet subtly wrong. Had the wallpaper always been this shade of faded burgundy? And the ornate carving on the newel post at the foot of the main staircase, I could have sworn it depicted a cluster of grapes, not these unsettling, intertwining roots. My mind, still reeling, tried to rationalize the discrepancies away, blaming exhaustion, the fading light. But a deeper, more primal part of me knew better. I hurried, my steps quickening, towards the grand front doors. They were solid oak, heavy and imposing, and they represented my only clear exit. Each step felt like wading through treacle, the air growing thick, resisting my movement. The hallway seemed to lengthen with every stride, the distance to the doors refusing to diminish. I glanced over my shoulder, a sudden urge to confirm I hadn't somehow passed the laundry room again. It was gone. Replaced by a blank stretch of wall, aged and textured, as if it had always been there. Locked. Of course. I fumbled for my keys, a jumble of metal in my trembling fingers. The large, skeleton key for the main lock clicked, and with a groan of ancient wood, the door swung inward. But it didn't open to the overgrown drive, or the twilight sky. It opened into a room I vaguely recognized, a dusty sitting room on the ground floor, filled with shrouded furniture and the scent of decay. A room I had just walked past to get to the front doors. The same room, but somehow different, shifted. The tall windows, which should have offered a view of the neglected garden, were now bricked up, thick mortar sealing them off entirely. My mind reeled. This wasn't possible. I stepped through the doorway, back into the sitting room, and turned around. The front doors were gone. In their place stood a solid, unyielding wall, adorned with the same burgundy wallpaper as the hallway I just traversed. The hallway itself was now a short, dead-end corridor. A guttural cry tore from my throat. The sitting room, familiar and then not, seemed to mock me. Solid. Unyielding. I needed another way out. A window. Any window. Each window I reached was either sealed by an impenetrable layer of brick or, more terrifyingly, revealed not the outside world, but another interior space, a narrow, lightless pantry, a cobwebbed storage closet, even a section of the main staircase. It was as if the house was folding in on itself, an impossible Escher print brought to life. No! I shouted, my voice raw, cracking. Let me out! The only response was the deep, resonant creak of the floorboards above me, a sound like an ancient beast shifting in its sleep. What was I doing? Why was I so desperate to leave? The house felt safe. Familiar. A sudden warmth spread through me, a deceptive comfort. Then, a flicker. No, this was the entity. This was its work. It was not only trapping me but also eroding my very will to escape. I stumbled, my legs suddenly weak, and collapsed against a shrouded armchair. My gaze fell upon a small, lacquered box on a nearby side table, an antique I didn't recall seeing before. My restorer's instinct, or what was left of it, compelled me to open it. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, was a single, folded piece of paper. The handwriting was cramped, almost illegible, but undeniably my own. Don't trust the exits. They aren't real. You've tried before. You forget. The words swam before my eyes, a devastating punch to my already fractured sense of reality. How many times had I reached this exact point, only to have my memory wiped clean, my efforts rendered moot? The realization struck me with the force of a physical blow. This wasn't just a physical prison, it was a prison of the mind, designed to make me forget my captivity, to erase the very concept of escape. They weren't trying to confuse me anymore. They were soothing. They were telling me that everything was fine. That I was home. That I belonged here. A profound, crushing weariness settled over me. My desperate attempts to flee had only led me deeper into the labyrinth, confirmed the horrifying truth of my predicament. The house wasn't just a place, it was a hungry, intelligent entity, and I was its prey, my mind its meal. The realization struck me with the force of a physical blow, a concussive wave that rattled the very foundations of my mind. You've tried before. The words, scrawled in my own hand, were a devastating punch to my already fractured sense of reality. A cold, creeping terror began to bloom in my chest, a parasitic flower unfurling its petals with sickening slowness. I stumbled back, knocking against a stack of brittle, leather-bound books. They tumbled to the floor with a dry rustle, scattering ancient dust into the air. This wasn't just about the Manor's secrets anymore, it was about my secrets, the ones ripped from me again and again. I needed to know. The desperate urgency pulsed through my veins, overriding the fear, replacing it with a grim, unwavering determination. This time, I wouldn't forget. I couldn't forget. Every object, every shadow, seemed to mock me with its familiarity, its silent complicity in my repeated torment. My gaze fell upon the narrow service staircase, rarely used, leading down to the utility rooms. The large, industrial-sized washers and dryers, relics from a bygone era, pulsed with a monotonous energy, their heavy drums slowly rotating, their vents expelling warm, humid air. The smell of stale water and faint bleach hung heavy, a stark contrast to the dust and aged wood upstairs. I leaned against one of the cool, porcelain sinks, my hands gripping the edge until my knuckles ached. The constant, mechanical drone of the machines was a strange comfort, a dull static that momentarily drowned out the chaotic clamor in my head. But it wasn't enough. I needed answers, something concrete. My eyes swept over the room, the piles of forgotten linens in wicker baskets, the shelves laden with yellowed soap flakes and rusted tins. Nothing. It was old, rough-hewn, and bound with rusty iron straps. I pulled it out, the wood scraping against the flagstone floor. Not the elegant, leather-bound kind from the study, but small, unassuming notebooks, their covers faded, their pages brittle. They were all in the same hurried, almost frantic script. My script. I pulled one out, my fingers trembling. The date on the first page was almost a year ago. A year ago. This was not the first time. I began to read, standing there in the humid, thrumming laundry room, the rhythmic slosh of water from the machines providing a grotesque soundtrack to my descent. The entries were fragmented, desperate. They detailed a growing unease, a sense of something missing. My memories, not just of the house, but of myself, were dissolving. The journal called it the erosion. It spoke of an entity, not of flesh and blood, but of pure absence, a vacuum that fed on the very essence of identity. It wasn't a ghost in the traditional sense, nor a demon. It didn't kill in the physical sense, it simply consumed. And once it had taken everything, it would reset, allowing a fresh mind to inhabit the house, to begin the cycle anew, to provide a new feast. My hand shook so violently I almost dropped the journal. The ultimate cost. It wasn't death, it was something far worse. It was the obliteration of being. To be erased, utterly and completely, leaving no trace of who you were. And then, the horrifying realization, the entity didn't just consume. It used the house as a lure, a trap, drawing in those with a connection, those who sought to restore, to understand. It recycled its victims, wiping their minds, allowing them to rebuild just enough of a personality to become palatable again. The entity demanded memory, identity, experience. It thrived on the unique essence of a self. To appease it, one would have to offer up a life, not in blood, but in mind. A complete surrender of one's consciousness, a willing sacrifice of self. Or, more horrifyingly, the forced sacrifice of another's identity. To feed it a fresh mind, to condemn someone else to the same insidious erosion, just to buy precious, fleeting time. The rhythmic hum of the machines transformed into a monstrous, grinding hunger. The truth, stark and brutal, was laid bare. I wasn't just restoring a house, I was trapped in an ancient, insidious feeding ground. And I was the meal. Or, if I were to break the cycle, I would have to become the butcher. The entity didn't want my life, it wanted my soul, piece by agonizing piece. And it had already taken so much. The rhythmic thrumming of the washing machines in the laundry room with humming machines was a dull, insistent pulse against the inside of my skull. My fingers, or what I felt were my fingers, traced the worn edge of the leather-bound journal. The ink on the page blurred, then sharpened, then blurred again, not because of my vision, but because my mind struggled to hold the shapes, the meanings. Memory was a sieve. Every time I reached for a specific thought, a detail, it slipped through the holes, leaving behind only the echo of its absence. I remembered having a name. Reed. I remembered that name. But what did it mean? What did I mean? The entity was a sculptor of voids, hollowing out the core of me, replacing my vibrant recollections with a gray, featureless expanse. The previous owner had written about a complete surrender of one's consciousness. I'd read it 100 times, each reading feeling like the first, yet imbued with a terrifying familiarity. Not blood, but mind. Not death, but erasure. It wasn't enough to just give it memories, it wanted the unique architecture of a self, the very blueprint of who I was. It feasted on the process of being, not just the archives of what had been. And in return, it left. What? A husk? A marionette? I ran a hand over my face. The skin felt alien, stretched and dry. My own reflection in the window of the machine, distorted by the swirling water and suds, barely registered as me. This wasn't just a threat to my life, it was a threat to my existence. The entity didn't want to kill me, it wanted to become me, or rather, it wanted to consume the essence of me, leaving behind a shell that looked and moved like reed, but was utterly empty. The journal entries had spoken of attempts to starve it. But how do you starve something that feeds on the very fabric of identity? If it demanded a complete surrender, what if that surrender wasn't a defeat, but a trap? My gaze drifted around the laundry room. The piles of forgotten linens, the baskets overflowing with faded towels, the ancient, clanking pipes that ran along the ceiling. Everything felt heavy with neglected time, like the house itself was holding its breath. If it thrived on the unique essence of a self, on the vibrant tapestry of a lived experience, then perhaps the key was to offer it something utterly devoid of uniqueness. A blank slate. Not my memories, not my passions, not my fears, but something manufactured. Something so profoundly unself that it would either choke on it or be imprisoned by it. The concept was monstrous, even to my fraying mind. A mind carefully devoid of all that made me me. A labyrinth of nothingness. A fortress built from the absence of thought. And then, I would have to offer it, but how? How could I, Reed, with my own identity already crumbling, fashion such an intricate, empty cage? I couldn't just offer it. I would have to become it. The sacrifice wasn't just my memories, it was the very act of being. I would have to strip myself down, consciously dismantle the remaining architecture of my mind, not just letting the entity devour it piece by piece, but presenting it with a structure designed to be its final meal and its ultimate prison. I would have to become the bait, the trap, and the lock. It would mean erasing Reed, not through passive consumption, but through an active, deliberate act of self-annihilation. I would build a mental landscape so barren, so devoid of the unique essence it craved, that it would either starve within it, or become hopelessly entangled in its own consumption of nothingness. The last of my true self would be the architect, and the first casualty. This wasn't merely a plan, it was a suicide of the soul. But what was the alternative? No. If I was to be consumed, I would go out fighting, not with a blade or a gun, but with the last vestiges of my intellect, my will. I would build it a mind, yes, but it would be a mind designed to be its tomb. The hum of the washing machines seemed to grow louder, more insistent, vibrating through the concrete floor and up into my bones. I clenched my jaw, the muscles aching. My mind might be a ruin, but a spark of desperate resolve still flickered within. I would not let it win completely. A final, tragic gift. A desperate, high-stakes gamble with my very essence. Now. I clung to that sound, that vibration against the soles of my worn boots, as if it were a tether to something real. My plan, if it could even be called that, was desperate. Foolish, perhaps. But what else did I have? The entity fed on memories, on identity. It twisted what was real, replacing it with a fog of doubt and manufactured fear. I was an antique restorer. My life was about preserving the true essence of things, stripping away the decay, revealing the original form. What if I could do the same for myself, for the house? I had spent the last few hours gathering. Not items of value, not things to be polished or repaired, but fragments. A worn leather-bound journal, its pages blank now, but once filled with my own clumsy childhood handwriting. A small, wooden bird, carved by my own hand years ago, a gift for a long-forgotten acquaintance. A chipped ceramic mug, the one I always used for my morning tea, bearing a faint, almost invisible crack I knew intimately. These were anchors, physical manifestations of me. The air in the laundry room with humming machines was thick with the smell of damp lint and a metallic tang that made my teeth ache. The industrial-sized machines, relics from a previous owner, spun and sloshed with a relentless rhythm. I had chosen this room because of them, because of their noise, their vibration, their function. Cleansing. Renewal. I opened the heavy, steel door of the largest washing machine, the one that rumbled with the deepest bass note. The empty drum gleamed dully under the single bare bulb hanging overhead. My hands trembled as I placed the objects inside, the journal, the carved bird, the mug. Each one a tiny, fragile piece of my identity. This wasn't about washing them, it was about imbuing the act of washing with intent. I was trying to create a focal point, a crucible for my own self. As I pressed the start button, the machine groaned, then began to fill with water, a churning, rushing sound that momentarily swallowed the world. That's when it started. The whispers, previously a faint background hum, sharpened, coalescing into distinct voices. Reed? Who is Reed? A child's voice asked, high and reedy, right beside my ear. I spun around, but the room was empty, save for the machines and me. The voice shifted, became deeper, more cynical. You think you know yourself? The plastic scraped against my back, a jarring, physical sensation that helped ground me. But the visual assault was worse. For a sickening moment, I saw my own face staring back from the wall, but it wasn't my face. It was younger, softer, then older, lined with wrinkles I hadn't earned. It was a kaleidoscope of faces, all vaguely familiar, none truly mine. Fire? I had never started a fire. Had I? A flicker of an image, hot orange light, smoke stinging my eyes, flashed in my mind. No, that wasn't real. It couldn't be. My hands flew to my temples, pressing hard, trying to squeeze the intrusive thought away. The washing machine with my objects inside churned violently, its rhythm accelerating, becoming frantic. The thrumming intensified, vibrating through the concrete floor, up my legs, into my very bones. It felt like my skull was a drum, being beaten from the inside. "You're a fraud," another voice, this one resonating with the deep rumble of the machine itself, boomed through the room. "All your restorations, just covering up the truth. You don't preserve, you erase." My own craft, twisted against me. This was its tactic. Attack the core. Attack my purpose. I had to remember why I was doing this. I opened my eyes and forced myself to look at my reflection in the glass porthole of the spinning machine. My face was pale, gaunt, fear etched around my eyes. But it was my face. The entity wanted me to doubt that. Then, a new wave, a different kind of memory. Not a false one, but a true one, overlaid with a sickening distortion. My mother's face, smiling, holding out a freshly baked cookie. But her eyes were black, empty, and her smile stretched too wide, too sharp. My father, teaching me how to sand a piece of wood, his patient hands guiding mine. But his hands were gnarled, skeletal, and the wood crumbled to dust at his touch. They never loved you. You were always alone. Always forgotten. A guttural cry tore from my throat. No. That was the lie. That was the deepest cut. I slammed my fist against the side of the machine, the dull clang echoing painfully. The metal vibrated, sending a jolt up my arm. That's when I saw it. Not a vision, not a memory, but a physical effect. The water sloshing inside the machine, churning around my anchors, was not just water. It was faintly shimmering, almost glowing with a pale, ethereal light. And as it spun, as the rhythmic cleansing continued, the shimmering intensified. It wasn't washing away my memories, but perhaps something else. A sudden, jarring thought pierced through the mental chaos. The entity didn't just feed on memories, it resided in them, like a parasite within a host. It was a part of the house's history, a collection of forgotten moments, and it was trying to make me its newest vessel. I was trying to unravel it. It was a sound of pain, of pure, unadulterated fury. The light in the machine flared, a brilliant, blinding white that forced me to shield my eyes. The machines around me shuddered violently, their metallic bodies groaning, threatening to tear themselves from their moorings. I felt a searing pain behind my eyes, as if my brain was being pulled apart. But through it all, I held on. I focused on the radiant glow from within the washing machine, on the relentless, cleansing spin. It was working. I was hurting it. I was fighting not just for my life, but for the very concept of Reed to exist. I was still here. I was still me. And I wouldn't let it take that. Not now. Not ever. The water sloshed, not outward, but inward, as if the surface tension of reality itself had fractured, pulling a thin, shimmering sheet of liquid into the depths of the machine's steel drum. A low, wet gasp escaped the mechanism, a sound like a starving beast finally drawing breath, then it shuddered once, violently, and fell silent. The incessant, grinding hum of the other machines in the laundry room with humming machines, which had been a dull roar just moments before, now seemed to pierce the sudden quiet, a relentless, irritating drone against the ringing in my ears. My fist still throbbed, a dull, insistent ache radiating from my knuckles. I stared at the dent I'd made in the cold, unyielding metal panel, the imprint of my desperate act. The sharp, acrid scent of ozone, mingled with the familiar smell of damp linen and stale water, hung heavy in the air. My breath hitched, a ragged, painful thing in my throat. Gone. The air felt lighter, thinner, almost too sharp in my lungs. My skin, which had felt clammy and constricted, now prickled with a strange, almost painful sensitivity. Was it over? Had I won? There was no surge of triumph, no rush of relief. Only an echoing emptiness, a profound stillness that felt more terrifying than the cacophony of before. The droning of the other machines became a distant, muffled backdrop, as if my hearing had retreated into itself. I pushed myself upright, my knees threatening to buckle. My vision blurred for a moment, then snapped into a stark, almost hyperreal focus. Every speck of dust dancing in the single, grimy window pane, every chipped edge of the ceramic sink, every stain on the concrete floor, it all registered with an unsettling clarity. But with this clarity came a terrifying vacuum. The machine, the water, the confrontation. It was all there, a vague, terrifying impression, like a dream fading just beyond reach. But the details, the sharp edges that defined experience, they were dissolving. My name. Reed. I grasped onto it, a fragile anchor in a suddenly vast, unmoored sea. Yes, Reed. That much was solid. I was Reed. But who was Reed? But the specifics, the exact curve of my nose, the shade of my eyes, the way my mouth quirked when I was amused, they were elusive, like trying to catch smoke. I ran a hand over my jaw, feeling the stubble, the familiar contours, yet it felt generic. Like I was touching a mannequin. Panic began to coil in my gut, a slow, insidious burn. I looked down at my hands, the tools of my trade, the instruments of my meticulous craft. Antique restoration. That was it. I was an antique restorer. I knew the precise methods for stripping varnish, for repairing delicate inlays, for coaxing life back into forgotten pieces. I knew these things. A jumble of images flashed through my mind, wood grain, amber liquid, a soft sheen, but the process, the actual how-to, it was gone. Not forgotten, not just momentarily inaccessible. It was simply absent. A gaping hole where a lifetime of acquired skill should have been. No. This couldn't be right. This was a trick. A lingering echo of the entity's foul game. I opened them again. The humming machines droned on, oblivious. The laundry room was exactly as it had been, stark and utilitarian. But I was not. A house. Somewhere. With a garden? A swing set? Images flickered, disjointed and incomplete. A woman's face, kind and soft, but her name? Her relationship to me? A blank. A man with rough hands and a booming laugh, but who was he? My father? My uncle? The connections were severed. It wasn't just a few memories. It was the scaffolding of my life. The details that built me, piece by painstaking piece, had been systematically dismantled, leaving behind only a skeletal framework. I was a house with no furniture, no photographs on the walls, no scent of home. Just empty rooms, echoes of what might have been. The horror wasn't in the presence of the entity any longer. It was in its absence. I had driven it back, perhaps, but it had taken a significant piece of me with it. The vibrations of the humming machine seemed to resonate in my very bones, a constant, irritating reminder of a world that continued, indifferent to my internal dissolution. I brought my hands up to my face, covering my eyes, as if I could physically block out the truth of my shattered mind. The entity had left its mark, a scar not on my flesh, but on the very fabric of my being. I was Reed, yes. But I was also a stranger, living in the ruins of a forgotten life. The shuddering of the heavy steel drum in the laundry room with humming machines didn't stop. It escalated, rattling the industrial strength appliances, making the concrete floor vibrate under my feet. The low, wet gasp that had escaped the mechanism seemed to stretch, thin and reedy, into a drawn-out sigh. Then, with a final, violent lurch that sent a shiver up my spine, everything went silent. The humming machines around me, usually a constant drone, were now eerily quiet. My breath hitched. It was over. It had to be over. I stumbled forward, my legs feeling like lead, and stared at the machine. The door was still latched, the heavy glass porthole opaque with condensation. I pressed my palm against the cool metal, a strange mix of relief and terror washing over me. No more pulsing. I spent the next few days in a haze. Empty. I walked through the echoing halls, the dust motes dancing in the shafts of light, and felt nothing but a profound exhaustion. The entity was gone. I had won. Or, at least, I had survived. The idea of staying another moment in that house, even in its newfound emptiness, was unbearable. I arranged for its sale, a quick, almost desperate transaction with a property developer who seemed oblivious to its history, only seeing square footage and potential. I signed the papers without a backward glance. The air here smelled of exhaust fumes and freshly baked bread, not damp stone and decay. I bought new tools, arranged my workbench with meticulous care, and tried to rebuild the life I'd known before the inheritance. I started with a simple commission, a Victorian writing desk, its veneer chipped, its brass fittings tarnished. It was familiar work, grounding. But things were different. At first, I attributed it to trauma. The mind played tricks after such an ordeal. I'd catch myself staring at a polished surface, seeing not my own reflection, but a fleeting, distorted image of a face I didn't recognize, gaunt, ancient, with eyes that held an unfathomable depth. Then came the memories. Not my memories, but vivid, unbidden flashes of things I'd never experienced. A specific scent of old parchment and beeswax would conjure a vision of a grand library, shelves soaring to the ceiling, filled with leather-bound tomes. I'd see the precise pattern of light filtering through a stained glass window onto a dusty oak floor, feel the weight of a heavy silver key in my hand, taste the metallic tang of old blood. These weren't vague impressions, they were sharp, detailed recollections, rich with sensory information, yet utterly alien to my own life. I tried to dismiss them. Stress. Fatigue. My mind was simply processing the strange history I'd uncovered in the Manor, manifesting it as phantom memories. But they grew more frequent, more insistent, weaving themselves into the fabric of my own past, making it harder to discern what was truly mine. One afternoon, I was carefully regilding a small, ornate picture frame. My hands, usually so precise, moved with an unfamiliar grace, almost an instinct. I found myself choosing a shade of gold leaf I would never normally use, applying it with a delicate touch I hadn't consciously learned. As I worked, a strange sense of rightness settled over me, a deep satisfaction that felt both comforting and profoundly unsettling. The finished frame, gleaming under the workshop lights, was beautiful, undeniably. But it wasn't my beauty. I held it up, scrutinizing my reflection in the empty space where a portrait would go. My eyes met mine. But behind them, deep within the pupils, there was a flicker. A different light. Not a distortion, not a trick of the glass, but a knowing glint, a patient, ancient intelligence that had never been mine. It was like looking into a window, and seeing someone else looking back, from inside me. The entity hadn't been destroyed in the laundry room with humming machines. It hadn't been banished. The machine hadn't annihilated it, it had processed it. Refined it. And in that violent, shuddering process, something fundamental had shifted. It hadn't just taken my memories, it had integrated with me. Or perhaps, I had become its final, most perfect vessel. I wasn't Reed anymore. Not entirely. My hands, my eyes, my thoughts, they were still mine, yes, but they were also its. My victory hadn't been a defeat for the entity, but a metamorphosis. A rebirth. And I was the cradle. A faint, almost imperceptible hum started in the quiet workshop, a low vibration that seemed to emanate not from the city outside, but from the very air around me, from within me. It was the sound of something vast, ancient, and endlessly patient, finally settling into its new home. And as I looked at the strange, beautiful frame in my hands, a faint, knowing smile stretched across my lips. It wasn't my smile. But I felt it, nonetheless. I felt it, and I understood. The horror wasn't over. It had just begun. And I was its architect.